Hello and welcome to another edition of Sandy and Friends. I'm Susan Court, the Development Director with the Hershey Symphony Orchestra, and we want to thank you for joining us tonight as we talk to some very talented musicians and celebrate Beethoven's 250th birthday coming up on December the 16th. We've got some really interesting reflections to share with you tonight related to Beethoven's sonatas. And before I turn things over to Dr. Sandy Dackow, I just want to take a moment to thank our very generous sponsors from our last season, including Highmark and Penn State Health, the Hershey Company, McQuaid Blasco, Cornwall Manor Retirement Communities, the Office of Stephen Stein Law Offices, UPMC Pinnacle, Mabel Ting Piano Tuning, and our bronze sponsors, Hershey Entertainment and Resorts, the Hershey Trust Company, the Hershey Rotary Club, Members First, Country Meadows, and Manja Manja Italian Grill. So Sandy, I know there's an awful lot that you want to pack into the next hour, so I'm going to turn things over to you and our three musicians who are joining us this evening for the conversation.
Thank you, Susan Court, and thank you for all you do for the Hershey Symphony. Thank you, all of our sponsors, all of our supporters, our patrons, our subscribers, our friends. We are very lonely without you. I can tell you we miss you a great deal. I'd like to introduce our musicians who are sharing the program. First up is Ken Osowski, piano faculty at York College, and to my right, I don't have how that works when we're doing it on the screen. Anyway, Dr. Michael Rusli, and then Al Stokes. Hold up the horn, Al. Great. These are colleagues. What we have in common is a passion for music. What we have particularly in common for these next several weeks is we just can't get enough Beethoven. And Beethoven was unfortunately this wonderful celebration of the 250th anniversary of his birth was one of the casualties of the current climate. And a lot of the festivities were canceled. Oh, there were all kinds of performances worldwide, literally around the world. So we're going to have our own party tonight, and we're going to talk about a body of music that I think is extraordinary for its breadth, for its depth, for the many lifetimes it seems to embrace as you cycle through these works, and they take a lifetime to do it, and I'm still working on this. We're talking about the sonatas of Ludwig van Beethoven. A concerto is generally viewed as a work which contrasts a solo instrument with a symphony orchestra, at least in the time of Beethoven. And there's, in many ways, a kind of a heroic dimension to it, maybe even an adversarial dimension to it, one versus the other, sometimes vying to see who's going to have the last word, sometimes playing wonderfully together. Sonatas are a more intimate art form. They fall under the umbrella, which is quite a large umbrella, of what we'd call chamber music. What's chamber music? It was essentially music that you could play in your own home or in just more intimate quarters than would be required by a symphony orchestra on the stage of a concert hall. And Beethoven gave us a number of sonatas. And I'm going to ask Ken Osowski to start because Beethoven left us 32 magnificent piano sonatas. If you can work your way through those 32, even just to listen to them and try to consider the individual personality of each one, you've gone through a lifetime of feelings, of thoughts. You're at that point, you are ready to communicate without words, to see the meaning of life without necessarily more than the scale degrees in front of you. So Ken, tell us some things about these sonatas, and especially tell us which ones you love the most.
Yes, well, thank you, Sandy, and thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be talking about this amazing music. Yeah, Beethoven's 32 sonatas for piano it's more than a lifetime's worth of music to study and experience. So all of these sonatas for all these various instruments are extraordinary, but he wrote more for piano than any other with the 32, and this was, of course, Beethoven's own instrument. He was a pianist. And so you get so many different facets of his musical personality. And of course, you really get to see the evolution of the composer from the early works of Opus 2, which are sort of Haydn-esque. You know, he was a student of Haydn's for a while, although supposedly he didn't think all that highly of Haydn, which is, you know, hard to believe. But they are clearly influenced by Haydn, those early sonatas. And then we move through the early sonatas, and we begin to see a real, unique musical personality emerge. It's there in the earliest sonatas as well, but it even emerges more with some of the famous earlier named sonatas like the Pathétique and the so-called Moonlight Sonata as well. And then the middle period works are, extraordinary. This is where he was really spreading his wings as a composer. This is the era of the Fifth Symphony, the violin concerto, the fourth and fifth piano concertos, some of these really monumental works. And from this period, we get works like the Waldstein and Appassionata. The Appassionata is, I can't say I have a favorite, but that's one that has been with me probably more than any other. I've performed that more than any other of the sonatas, and it's one of the most intensely tragic works of Beethoven's output. It's in F minor. And it's almost unremittingly tragic, this piece, with the exception of a tranquil middle movement, which is sort of like an oasis in the storm. And then we move into the later sonatas, which are, Beethoven really experimenting with form and structure and pianistic techniques. He was fascinated with fugal writing in his later years, so you see lots of fugues in the final sonatas. It's just an extraordinary journey that we go on from the earliest to the latest works. So because there's so many, we get the most intimate forms of expression to the most monumental. We get the most sort of tender and lyrical expressions, contrasted with the most sort of explosive and intense. It's been not with no coincidence that people have referred to Beethoven sonatas as the New Testament of keyboard music, as opposed to the Old Testament, which was the well-tempered clavier of Johann Sebastian Bach. So that's sort of my snapshot. I have so many favorites, but yes, the Appassionata is one. I love the three last sonatas. I've only performed the Opus 109, but the last three sonatas are they're from another world. I mean, with those pieces and the late string quartets, he's just operating on some other dimension. But yeah, what I would, if people are new to the piano sonatas, actually a great place to start is with the famous ones, the famous named ones. The Moonlight, the Pathétique, the Appassionata, the Waldstein, they're all masterpieces, even though
Ken, give us the opening of the Pathétique and the Moonlight and the Waldstein.
So
you didn't know I was going to do this. So I'm really putting you on the spot.
No, happy to. So actually, I have my students at York College. My piano students we're all studying Beethoven's piano music this semester. So I have three different students doing those of the Pathétique. They're doing each a movement of the Pathétique. So this is one I've been spending a lot of time with this semester. And so yes, the Pathétique. It's just right off the bat, you're getting into some heavy stuff with this piece. It starts with this slow introduction, which is just very deep and intense. He marks grave for the tempo, which is as much a character as it is a tempo. get just this, you're being pulled back and forth violently almost between extremes of dynamic right from the onset of this piece. So this is the C minor, Opus 13, known as the Pathétique Sonata. And I always, when I talk to my students, I say, okay, that means pathetic, but in modern,
it means pathos. It means
yes,
deep, deep feeling. Now, a whole generation of music lovers remember the PBS broadcasts of Carl Haas. So play a little of the second movement. Folks, you'll hear his voice saying, "Hello, everyone." I can't hear this music without hearing that in my mind.
So yeah, I mean, just so tender and heartfelt, coming off of this deeply intense and tragic first movement. He gives us the full range of human expression in a single sonata, and of course, across all 32 of them.
A little bit of the Moonlight, the opening of the Moonlight.
Sure, yeah.
Which I think most people have heard.
Probably the most famous, yes.
I'm having him do this because you all know these tunes, but you may not know what they're called. And there's a chance to match them up.
Beethoven actually did bestow the title of Pathétique on the one I was just excerpting, but the title of Moonlight Sonata was not Beethoven's. That came from someone else who thought that this was like, evocative of some moonlight on a lake or something like that, and it stuck. I don't know what Beethoven thought of that nickname, but it's the one that we know. So.
If it made money, he was happy.
Yeah.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Ken, for sharing these with us. And do you have any others that you want to just share some thoughts about? I'm going to throw in my 2 cents in a moment.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. I played a little bit from the Appassionata, which, yeah, as I mentioned, that in terms of intensity of expression, not just in Beethoven's output, but in just like all of classical music, I find few things as intense as that piece, with the exception of this prayer-like oasis of a slow movement. But the outer movements are almost exclusively in minor keys. And it's just at a certain pitch emotionally that it's almost unbearable in terms of its intensity. That's the
I think a lot of people in their mind, that kind of sums up their impression of Beethoven, would be in an example like that.
Yeah.
We're so lucky that he gave us, and in some of the non-sonata pieces, the incidental piano pieces as well, but he did leave us piano music that was playable by intermediate players, by students, and by very mediocre pianists like myself. We're so glad that it's there. And it's funny, I'm looking, I don't know that edition of the 32 Beethoven sonatas on your piano. The one I know is 2 inches thick.
I'm sorry, is
what, you can't see me. I'm looking at your iPad, thinking,
oh, yeah,
that's not what the music students were walking around with under their arm when I was a student. They had literally something that looked like the phone book.
Yeah, luckily I've got them on my iPad now. It's the Henley edition that I'm looking at, though. Yeah.
So I'm going to give you one of my favorites, and I think it's number 16. I could be wrong. It's the E flat one. Bum ba-dum, bum ba-dum. Did I get one of those numbers right?
Wait, hold on. That is, yes. Well, it's number 18. It's Opus
18.
31, number 3.
Okay.
And the Opus 31, the set of 3 sonatas, is really wonderful as well. It's full of contrasts. Probably the most famous of that set is the D minor, the Tempest, known as the Tempest.
That's another stormy one.
Absolutely.
There was a word, for those of you out in the audience, German expression called Sturm und Drang. And that was actually a literary term meaning a whole lot of stormy contrast and melodrama. And I don't know that any composer embodied that more frequently than Beethoven, or at least that's kind of the sound that's associated with him. Could you play just a few bars of that, or do you have that under your?
Which one, the E flat or the D minor?
Which would be more interesting? We've played a couple of stormy ones. Play the E flat.
So yeah,
That's so charming.
The E flat, yes, it's very sort of genteel and charming, and it actually that sounds less like Beethoven than a lot of his sonatas. It almost has sort of a Schubertian sort of melodicism.
It's kind of chill, you know. It's he's not angry at anyone right now.
Yeah.
Ken, this is for the audience. You know, I thinking what makes Beethoven sound like Beethoven, especially piano music. And I think when I figured this out, I felt so good. He was really probably the first writer of piano music to group notes closely together in the bass texture. And there was an example of that you just played. Really, you don't see Mozart doing that. You see Haydn once or, a little bit doing that. That's probably where he got the idea from. But just to play those low harmonies down there, that just opened up a whole new sound world for his listeners and the composers who will follow. Thank you so much for sharing this with us.
And that type of writing, like low in the instrument, it actually worked a lot better on Beethoven's instrument than on our modern day pianos because it had a lot more clarity in the low register.
Right. It didn't have the metal there that would cause it to reverb, right?
Yeah. So you find actually in a lot of Beethoven's piano music, you find stuff that it's really hard to make it sound clear on the modern instrument. But and I'm not a specialist in historical keyboards.
Well, you gave me a perfect lead in, Dr. Rusli, Mike.
Great.
Talking about the cello sonatas, and this kind of really blew me away when I first started reading about them. They presented balance problems between the piano and the cello. Are you ready for this? The cello kept on drowning out the pianoforte because there was no metal in the frame back then.
Oh.
And yeah, so like the cello was like really getting in the way. And these pieces were written, it's the pianist Rain was the boss, always the boss. I think the original edition came out for piano with cello obbligato or something like that. Today we'd flip that. We'd make the cellist would be the primary person and the pianist would be the collaborative artist or accompanist, which is a term that I would prefer to avoid. Tell us about your experience with these sonatas and what ones that you really enjoy.
Well, let me first start by saying that I can be best described as an enthusiastic amateur musician. So I don't bring to the table what you guys are bringing today. But when you first invited me, I was very flattered, thinking, hey, this is a chance to learn something through doing my own little bit of homework and listening to what you have to say. So let me just preface by describing these, giving historical context for these 5 cello sonatas. So he wrote 5 with groupings of 2, 1, and 2. 2 in the early period, where he wrote more of a traditional type of cello sonata with slow, fast type groupings, and with heavier on the piano side compared to the cello side in terms of emphasis. And then there's a middle period, which is the 3rd cello sonata, written in 1807, 1808, when he was in his mid-30s. The first two, he was in his mid-20s, 1796, which brought the sonata, cello sonata into full bloom. It's Stephen Isserlis said that this was the first ever cello sonata written where the cello part and the piano part were equally balanced. And then came the late sonatas, which were written in the 1818. He was in his 40s when he wrote them, 1818, 1817, where he is pushing the envelope of the sonata form and experimenting and doing a lot of fugal writing, which presaged, his late quartets, which were another 6 or 7 years down the road. The third sonata, I think, is a good entry point for this would be I forget the opus number.
69.
I'm sorry, 69, opus 69. It's an A major. It's a very bright sonata and very, very optimistic, bubbly. The interesting thing is that it was written, there's a little blurb at the start saying that this was written amid tears and sorrow. At the time, Napoleon was invading Austria and was at the gates of Vienna when Beethoven wrote this. So why did he write such a cheerful work? Perhaps he is in a defiant mode. I mean, I'm sure it was very depressing for everybody. They're about to be conquered, and he writes this incredibly joyful work. Except between the first and third movements, there is a slow section that lasts less than 2 minutes, which just had this incredible tenderness, heartfelt tenderness that was hard to describe, but it lasted only 16 bars, leading into this beautifully joyful third movement. And I found that section very poignant, very, very poignant. I loved it. Anyway.
Well, Mike, that's my favorite too, out of all 5 of them. I think if you line people up, you're going to get pretty good, strong consensus about that. Because as you said, the first 2 are early works. It's very funny because none of them have a really evolved slow movement until you get to the very last one. And there is the slow movement in the one you just described, but like you said, it's not very long.
Yeah.
And then we're off and running again with a very bright allegro. But I think cellists around the world would be happy if that was the only piece he'd ever written, but they're glad to have all 5 of them.
Yeah, they're all great. I think you can't slight any one of them. They're all 5 are part of the cellist's Bible, so to say, along with the Bach cello suites. I think it's something everybody aspires to. I've tried reading through them, at least 4 of them, with various levels of success. And after having done my little bit of homework, I've kind of rejuvenated my enthusiasm for these pieces, and I'm going to start to play them again.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And you've just inspired me. I'm going to go out and listen to Opus 69 when we're done. I'm hearing the tunes in my head and I'm thinking, why have I not done this in so long?
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Do you have anything else?
Yes, there was a section that really caught my attention upon re-listening, and it's in the second sonata. In the slow movement, it's a very sad adagio. And at the end of this, it's kind of a short thing, 2 minutes. And at the end of this, it kind of grinds to this, the last 3 or 4 bars. The piano kind of grinds to this slow halt where there are moments, long gaps of silence, like nothing, for several beats. And this is adagio, several adagio beats. piano would come back in, play kind of the same motive in a different key, and then a long pause, and finally it ends, or so we think. And then there's this long pause again. And I was thinking, okay, maybe we're ready for applause. No, the cello comes in after this pregnant pause and ends it with this exact same motive, with the piano kind of following at the end. I thought that was just incredible writing.
Now, does that go into the last movement?
Yes. Then
All right, I've got a funny story that I'll share with you, and you'll appreciate after that description you just gave. The piano, it's just, you're not sure what it's going to do. My best friend was a collaborative pianist, and she accompanied everybody when we were students. And I turned pages for all those performances because we were best friends, and it gave me a chance to be on stage and be absorbing at close range all this great music. So we were performing that, no, not we, she and the cellist were performing the second sonata, and I'm there. And of course, you never get a rehearsal if you're the page turner. You just show up and you turn the pages. But we got to the end of that movement, and normally what I would do, I would stand up and I would reach over and take the top of the page and turn it. Well, there were so many silent gaps. I'm thinking, I can't stand up during this. I can't break the mood. And I can't, and finally we got to the end, and I didn't even want to breathe. And then she whips the page over because I just didn't have the courage to break the mood. So she broke it for me, and we had a good laugh about it afterwards. But that's exactly what that movement does. It just suspends all time, all reality. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Thank you so much. I'll go last with the violin sonatas, but we have 32 piano sonatas. We have 10 violin sonatas. We have 5 cello sonatas. And then we have 1 sonata for an instrument that was going through transitions, metallurgical transitions at the time, and mechanical transitions at the time that Beethoven wrote this, as was the piano for that matter, but was kind of trapped with the older technology. And of course, I'm referring to the horn. There's 1 horn sonata that Beethoven wrote, and horns everywhere. Horn players are so grateful that they have a sonata by such an amazing master. Mozart left us concertos, but no sonatas. And it was the first real horn sonata where it was a collaboration between horn and piano, where they're essentially equal partners. I'm going to ask Al Stokes to kind of pick up on where I left off. Tell us about what the horn of Beethoven's time could do.
Well, the horn at that time was referred to as the natural horn. Simply a coil of tubing pitched in C with a mouthpiece and a large bell to the side. And it played only harmonics, therefore a natural horn. Now by harmonics, that's a natural phenomenon with tubes, and to go into the math of it would be way over the top. So let me play for you what the harmonic series is on a natural F horn. Now I'm going to grab the horn here so you can see I don't have any valves. I'm nothing mechanical here. This is what the horn does. Now those are the harmonic series it's referred to of an open horn. Well, Mozart, or should I say Beethoven, ran into a guy named Giovanni Punto, and he was a master at stopping the horn. What's stopping? That's using the left hand in the bell to change the air column to create different notes. Personally, I don't find it all that pleasant to listen to, but he was a master of it. And Beethoven heard him do this and was blown out of the water. Beethoven went to Punta and said, hey, let's get together and do a concert. What do you say? He says, sure. It was performed April 18th, I believe, in 1800. This is Opus 17, so it's a fairly early work. And he wrote it the night before.
Wow.
So, and this is according to Ferdinand Ries, who was another composer of lesser stature, but a friend of Beethoven's. He's reportedly said he did this at night. It runs about 15 minutes, the whole sonata. So this should tell you something about A, Beethoven, and B, Punto. The guy was good. Let me explain what this stop works. That's an open horn. This is what you do with your hand. By changing,
Al, turn around so we can see what your left hand's doing. He's essentially tuning the horn by opening and closing that gap with his left hand.
That's correct. That's correct. Now, I'll get into the sonata in a minute, but I wanted you to understand that the horn, this Punto guy, he was a master at this. He was, if it means anything, Punto died 3 years later. I don't know if it was because of the sonata or not. But in the sonata, in the middle of it, it goes to a low C, which is the lowest note on that horn. It's called the fundamental. And Beethoven wrote a fifth below that. And the only way you're going to get there is by just about closing down the horn and lipping it down. And don't laugh. As you can see that, yeah, it's incredible. Now, Haydn, his horn concerto went down to a low A, but it was an A horn. So it was the fundamental, no problem. But
Right.
Beethoven
Well, in a sense, some of that is like an auditory illusion. I want you to just take your mouthpiece out of the horn and let us see it, because he's playing notes that would normally be played on a tuba down in that range with much more tubing. And he's doing it with this tiny little mouthpiece. You got your finger there for scale. Getting your lip to vibrate slowly into that small mouthpiece to get those low notes is an acrobatic feat.
Well, the horn is actually a bumblebee. It's not supposed to fly. The mouthpiece,
Right.
the horn is pitched between a trumpet and a trombone. The mouthpiece, the rim, is approximately a third the width of a trumpet mouthpiece. And the cup, this part here, is approximately proportionally sized to a trombone. So it makes no sense, bottom line. But this is what we have and we love it.
Now, because the natural horn of Beethoven's time was playing notes based on the harmonic series Punto wasn't the first person to use hand stopping, because we see that called for in Mozart in the concertos also. You had to do that. But a lot of the music is based on the notes that you would hear in the harmonic series. What we would call, what our ear tells us that, oh, that's like a bugle call. Would you just give us a few more, give us a horn call? And he did that without any hands, folks. That's quite a...
Well, the whole essence here is that the horn, because of that harmonic series, as you go up, the notes get closer and closer together.
Right.
Therefore, the need for the hand is not as necessary. I mean, you have to be accurate, but it's not as necessary. Which
Right.
is,
And for listeners out there, the trumpet, the trombone, and the tuba, you start playing, you start reading your basic pitches in one particular octave. Horns start playing because of the way they're set up, because of the way they're actually starting their harmonics, they're starting an octave above that. I'm not saying that very well, but what
no,
I'm
that-
saying is
you're
that
correct. For those who have a feeling for what we're talking about, that's absolutely correct.
the
The
notes are
harmonics
closer together, and that makes it so fiendishly hard to get just the one you want, especially if the music is going by quickly.
Precisely. So you have Mozart. Well, you have Mozart. He stayed within a particular range, and he never went below an E flat. That was that's his lowest note. So I mean, that's the way it was when Mozart was writing. When Beethoven came along, he said, "Nah, we got a guy that can do this." And which was not uncommon at the period. A lot of these were written for a specific performer.
Right.
Mozart's horn concertos were written for
The
I
baker.
forget his name. Beg your pardon?
The baker. I can't remember his name either, but I thought
Yeah,
he was
you
a
know who I'm
baker.
talking about. It
He
was
baked.
written for a specific person with, I believe, a specific set of skills. Now, this rascal here, and this ties in with what Ken was talking about and what Mike was talking about. This, usually a sonata, it's a bunch of kids in a playground kind of playing well together and everybody taking turns and everything is nice and wonderful. This sonata was written for punto, and the way it was written, it let the audience know right out of the chute, I'm here for color. This is your star. And that's how it's written. Now, as far as the sonata goes, it starts off like a bull in a china shop. This is the opening solo horn. And now the piano comes in. Da, 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 da. Oh, so beautiful, so flowing. 8 measures later, it's almighty. What's going on? Bingo. And then the horn starts playing nice. He picks up the theme and it continues through, but he throws that in. It's constant. It's through the whole thing, and it gives both continuity, but it asserts the horn as a solo instrument, and the piano is there for giggles.
Well, I tell you, the horn players will forever be grateful to Beethoven for writing a solo vehicle for them with piano, not with orchestra, but with piano, with the content that this embraces. The musical ideas developed as they are, just the hand of a master giving them something worthwhile to play. It's on every contest list for our kids in high school, for our kids even lower, even younger than that. There is not a horn player who hasn't played this before they've graduated high school, because it's just the first thing you come to, and it's in a sense the Bible for solo literature. It's the first chapter, really, that and the Mozart concertos. Then
Yep.
you get into the orchestral literature, and we're going to talk more about that when we get to Beethoven symphonies, which I can't wait for, because what he does with the horns is so much fun. And yeah, I'm gonna give a sneak preview with one quickie little example of the horn parts in the Seventh Symphony, which are such screamers. It's horn in A, the finale. And I remember a friend of mine gave me as a gift they were LPs at the time, the complete Beethoven symphonies with von Karajan and the Berlin Philharmonic. And at the very end of the finale to the Seventh Symphony, he says, "Listen carefully." And I read later on that those pieces were so heavily, very carefully edited before they were released, except this one spot where he's going up for the high E, which would be a written B for the horn, playing on an F horn, and it's a screamer of a note, and the music is so exuberant at that point, and he totally misses. He totally clams, and the editors didn't even take it out because it was so honest, and it was like, you went for it. You went for it. What more could we ask?
Yeah, it's a lot like a sporting match.
Exactly. You went down in glory, and they never edited it out. And I love to listen to that moment because it reminds me that there are no mistakes that are tragic as long as we gave it our very best shot.
I don't think you could hope to edit it out.
I guess not. Thank you so much, Al, for sharing that with us and for telling us about the mechanics of the instrument.
Certainly.
Gee, folks, I hate to bring up the rear. I don't really play violin much anymore, but there was a time when I was smoking hot, and that's actually for real. And I loved the Beethoven sonatas. There's 10 of them, and it's funny how the piano sonatas kind of spread across Beethoven's entire different periods and evolution creatively. The cello sonatas are a great example of just how a few pieces, 5 pieces, can be early, can be the one in the middle, and then late. And they actually are earlier than any of the violin sonatas and later than any of the violin sonatas. Susan, am I up on the screen? Guys, can you see me?
Yep.
Good. Okay.
We see you.
Good. Just wanted to be sure. And the violin sonatas, they're mostly early works. They start off with Opus 12, and 1 through 9, I think 9 is Opus 47, the wonderful Kreutzer Sonata. And then there's a big gap before he decides to pen another one, which was Opus 96, which is a whole different flavor, very contemplative. Ken and I were talking about it, and it kind of reminds me of just a big question, a wistful question that doesn't really demand an answer. It just kind of throws it out there for you to think about. The early sonatas are a lot of fun. There's 2 of them that are named. One is the Spring Sonata, number 5, and a lot of fun to play. And the other big one is Sonata number 9, which is what's nicknamed the Kreutzer Sonata. Those of you who are violinists, you've all practiced Kreutzer etudes. They're unavoidable. They give you building blocks of your technique. And this piece was written with Kreutzer in mind. It very tempestuous in the manner of those piano sonatas that Ken was demonstrating. And first movement, wow, just a universe of Tempest. Second movement, a set of variations. And there are times when the violin is really, really much less important than the piano. And again, these were originally released as piano sonatas with violin obbligato. And finally, the last piece is just a barn burner. The last movement is a barn burner. It's a lot of fun, romps around. The previous sonata, number 8, literally has a barn dance at the end, and that was a whole lot of fun for me to perform. I did that a lot of times for students. And some of the early pieces, or early sonatas, they have different personalities, quite similar to the piano sonatas. The C minor 1, number 4, very similar to the C minor flavor of a lot of the piano works. But Beethoven wrote these for himself and for colleagues. Beethoven wrote a lot for himself. Most people don't remember that Beethoven, as was Mozart, as was Haydn, as were many of their colleagues, they were primarily keyboard players, but they were also very accomplished, very, not accomplished is not the right word, but had the skill set to do a whole lot as violinists. And so Beethoven he'd played violin since he was a child. His father actually wanted to market him as the new Mozart. In fact, they knocked 2 years off of his age. And for a while, even the historical sources didn't know whether he was born in 1770 or 1772. This was because, strictly as a business decision, his father wanted him to appear more like a prodigy and to be able to make money on this poor kid. So he saw what, the success that Papa Mozart had with Mozart. He said, "You're going to be the next bread and butter for me. You're going to take Vienna by storm." But little Ludwig was not cute, and he was not engaging in the same way that Mozart was, and he did not present himself as a prodigy in the same way. He took a little more time to mature. But the good news is he played violin. And we hear at the time of, right now we're going through elections and we deal with the Electoral College, and that's probably once every 4 years we hear the term elector. But electors were very much a part of the political structure back in Germany of the day. And where Beethoven grew up in the city of Bonn, he played in the Electors Orchestra. That was really his first real employer. And he played, I love to point this out to students, he played viola in the orchestra. And if you listen to the viola parts, they're great viola parts in his quartets, but even better are the viola parts in the orchestral music. He knows how to write in that lower register for the instrument in a way that nobody had previously. And I always loved to play those parts whenever I would play viola in the orchestra. So great music. Folks, if you have only one Beethoven violin sonata, look up number 9, Opus 47, number 9 in A major, the Kreutzer Sonata, and you are in for one wild ride. One of the most fun things I ever did was learn these sonatas. I think I learned about half of them and performed several of them, and they'll be with me forever as some of my very, very best friends. So during these days when we socially are distant, I know that you're all doing a lot of listening. Some more ideas for you to listen. Folks, do you have any other ideas to share? Any other thoughts or comments on each other's commentary?
I have only one other comment. I believe it was 1838 that Beethoven's Ninth Symphony was premiered.
1826.
I'm sorry?
1826, or I think it was 1826, because he died in 27.
Well, then it definitely was not 38.
Yeah, right.
When he wrote that, and Sandy, you can attest, the third movement, the slow movement.
I hope I got that right.
is
Oh,
almost-
the third movement. That third movement's a horn concerto.
That whole horn solo is for fourth horn, which is the lowest horn.
Uh-huh.
And the reason it's so phenomenal is because that symphony that performed it, the fourth horn player was the only horn player in the section that had valves. And therefore,
I did not know that.
To the low F, concert B flat. He was the only one who could do it. You can't do that on a natural horn.
I don't think any orchestra piece other, that was not a solo vehicle had ever asked a horn player to do what Beethoven asks of that fourth horn player in the third movement of the ninth. It's in a class by itself.
Yeah, you can't audition for any symphony anywhere without that being on the repertoire list.
Right.
If you can't play that, don't waste your time and money.
Gentlemen, thank you so much.
Can I say one other thing?
Sure, Ken.
I just want to say, I'm learning a lot. I've played probably most of the violin sonatas. At some point in my life, I love playing chamber music, and I think I've only played one of the cello sonatas, and I don't know the horn sonata at all. That's why I was pulling up the score in my iPad to
I was going to say, I was so impressed that you did that.
Oh, I just found it on imslp.org. And
well, let's get together.
Yeah, there's so much more out there to discover. I'm really inspired to go check out more of this music. And we've talked some about the performers that Beethoven was writing for. He himself, being a pianist, was a great improviser at the instrument. And just one thing I wanted to add about the piano sonatas is that there are passages in many of them that they're basically like probably written out versions of what Beethoven improvising at the instrument would have been like. And there's some really, really fascinating stuff. And one other thought, as we're talking about some like the later works, like the Ninth Symphony, for instance, of course, most people know that Beethoven lost his hearing, and we can only speculate as to what effect that had on these late works. But I find them completely awe-inspiring. That just the imagination and the audacity in this late music, certainly. The later piano sonatas, the late cello sonatas, the late string quartets, the Ninth Symphony, and so forth. I mean, this is music that it's like it was avant-garde music in the 1820s. I mean, there was nothing else even remotely like it being imagined.
Well, there was a great book, and I think the author was Sullivan, but it was called Beethoven and His Spiritual Development. If I had it in paperback.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
it's a short little book, but
yeah, short little book. But I remember one phrase, and I'm going to get as close to it as I can, talking about number one, being deaf, losing his hearing. Number two, being in his late period, where everything he's doing, no one else is anywhere near him. And it said he was meant to sail strange seas alone. That just got me right in the gut. And I read that when I was a student. And I believe that same author, if I'm remembered correctly, equated middle Beethoven, the middle quartets, the big fat symphonies, equated middle Beethoven with the mature works of Shakespeare, but says that the late works of Beethoven have no peer anywhere. Now, that's obviously an opinion, but that hit me right in the gut also. I thought, wow, that's okay. That's why it makes us feel the way we do, but we can't really even tell you what that feeling is because we don't have words for it. We don't really understand it. We're just trying to find our way through it and try to make sense out of it. But there is no question that it is powerful. And through spending time with this music, we come to know ourselves differently.
And there's it's a cliche. It's been used so much, but I think it's absolutely spot on. You hear people say that this late Beethoven's music, particularly the late works, the music is better than it can ever be performed. No performance will ever, totally uncover all of its secrets and do it full justice. And that's why it's such a joy and adventure being a musician. You just try and try and try to do justice to this, unspeakably incredible music.
My whole life, I've never felt worthy of any of that. And it's like, okay, you're getting old enough now. You really should take a stab at some of this, try to understand it better. And so I listen to the late quartets, but I'm still baffled by much of it, even though they're great to listen to. And I'm always baffled by the Grosse Fuge, the Grosse Fuge, the end of the very final thing he wrote for quartets, because that thing is just madness. But what divine madness it is, right? I guess that's a great way to end. What divine madness some of this music is. Some of it is perfectly calculated. Almost all of it is actually very rational underneath what we might, which may convey the feelings of abandon, total abandon madness, or whatever else. But it's all constructed with great discipline, with great thought. We know because we were blessed to be able to recover Beethoven's sketchbooks that he simply didn't dash things off, which Mozart was able to do. He would be, Leonard Bernstein did this great presentation on the Fifth Symphony. Look at the sketches. Well, not yet. Well, not yet. Of course, everybody knows the music to that symphony, so we know how it's going to end, how the story is going to end. And no, that's not quite as good as what he did. That's better, but that's still not as good as it's going to be. We have the advantage of hindsight that way. But just that Beethoven was always chipping at an idea to get at the diamond inside. And if anything, he was trying to make it more concise, the way wordsmiths do. How do I make this even stronger with fewer words? Well, how do I make this idea even more of what it needs to be with less fuss, or whatever, or fewer wrong turns, or whatever? And I'm so glad he took the time to do that. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for being a part of this. I've learned from each of you, and we've had fun sharing ideas. To our listeners out there, our next installment after this will be an examination of the monumental concertos of Beethoven. And then we have more coming in the pipeline as we get closer to the birthday. So keep your eyes, watch this space, as they say. Keep your eyes on our YouTube channel, because as long as we can't be there in person, we can still have music amongst us and make it come alive. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Susan Court.
Thank you, Sandy, for organizing this evening and pulling together Ken, Mike, and Al. I really enjoyed listening to you. What a pleasure to listen to the conversation, listen to the music, and also watch you learn from each other. That was really exciting. So still much to learn from Beethoven, as we saw in this conversation tonight. So thank you for taking the time to participate.
Thank you. And thank you, please. The Hershey Symphony will be back. You see the hall behind me? It's just waiting. They're waxing the floor as we speak. They can't wait for us to be on stage.
That's for sure.
We have to go through what we have to go through in the meantime, but we will, or as Arnold Schwarzenegger, it's great to end with an Austrian accent. As long as we're talking about Beethoven, we'll be back.
That's right. I think we should end on that note. Thank you, Sandy. Thank you to Mike, Ken, and Al, and thank you all for watching. Bye-bye.